And again, we're moving now into the panel discussion. I'd like to, put the questions that I would like to make. It's not really questions, but it's more like comments, if you like, that I would like you to give some feedback upon. And the main idea behind this is to abandon the anthropocentric view where we are the ones who decide about what's happening in the world. We are the ones who not only decide, but we interpret and we create things, and then we talk about these things. That is okay, but it's not the point. The whole idea of introducing the quantum is to destroy that certainty, the certainty of the common sense, which we use at the very end to always defend our logic, like, oh, you make no sense. And that is the base that we all use as our conversation with one another, because that's what we can. But the quantum says exactly the opposite. And that's what Filippo was talking in the morning about the coin that is crooked. So in other words, you expect that something is going to make sense. It's going to be 50-50 because that's what sense says. That's what nature says. That's what experience says. That's what we all know. That's what common consensus says. And yet it doesn't happen. And yet we have particles that exist and don't exist at the same time. Things that make no sense whatsoever, and we have to make sense out of this idea of no sense. And this is exactly the question that I want to, or what's the word? The enlightenment that I want you to give to me, because I'm very interested in this idea of the nonsense, the idea that things don't make any sense, and yet there's a logic inside of it. I'll offer you some kind of hints on that. And again, I'll take it from your own conversations. I mean, we talked about the idea of the non-human, right? What does it mean to be non-human? We have human, and then you negate it. So you have the non-human. Yeah, but what does it mean to be non-human? Is this everything else, excluding the human, or is it something that is non-human understandable? In other words, human as in like, I don't know this thing because it doesn't look familiar in the sense that I understand what a human is. And Adrian used the word dream, which is, again, we don't know what a dream is. We don't have any control of it. It's just coming to us, and we think, and use the word quantum randomness at some point, which is also a very interesting word because it's basically introducing randomness, which we already know that we don't know what it is, but it makes it even more complicated because it becomes quantum on top of not understandable. And again, Špela brought the word erotic, and again, the erotic is what I understood it as objective erotic. It's like the thing we say, like, I fall in love with something, like it made me do something that I didn't want to do, in the sense that I overcame. It made no sense to me to fall in love with that person. It doesn't make any sense. And yet I did it. So what I'm trying to bring up here is to investigate is this idea of the non-human. Again, not the sense of the absurd and the make no sense in the kind of like crazy, but in the one that the sense of the nonsense. In other words, is there any logic behind certain things like randomness, like a mistake, like an accident, like a glitch? What is a glitch anyway? And why is that something that we need to be aware of? Because it may be a message coming from another world, the world of what we say nonsense, the world of the non-common sense. So I'll ask a general question here, and this is actually coming from the audience, that the question is randomness and uncertainty the conditions of imagination? Again, in the context of what I just said, I'd like to see if you have any comments on how does randomness actually contribute towards imagination? But not from a point of view that I was inspired, then it becomes you. Then it becomes anthropocentric. But what is the things outside of you that actually produced imagination? That's the question that I have. And I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but I'm opening to you.
Perhaps I can say some comments from
Sure.
the previous speakers to Adrian, because he mentioned data. And I think last time, Costa, we had a talk that you have a manifesto about the data and the data or something. And I think exactly what you can expand. And I noticed the word randomness. Of course, it's quite important in the data movements, and we can find this similarity between the data and also some programs, because it can trigger some, as Andrew mentioned, unpredictable things, and it's similar to I think misreading or some errors. Sometimes you consider it as something wrong, but actually it can trigger more imaginations and creativities. So that's I can trigger our maybe conversation on the creativity and the randomness. And also I have some feedback on Joanna's talk, because I find her presentation, there's one sentence creativity as non-functional access. And because we usually consider AI as a useful tool, but when you combine AI and the creativity, you have to trigger its uselessness. So it's kind of an interesting balance. Maybe we can also talk more on that. This is some comments from the previous presentations. So.
Okay, so maybe I can, thank you for this. Maybe I can take this up quickly to respond to both Joe and Kostas about the human, non-human, and how this relates to AI. So it's interesting that Kostas said that he understands the human. I don't purport to do that. I actually am still quite bemused about the human. But what I'm trying to do with the concept of the non-human is work through less of an opposition and more towards discovering some kind of unknowingness, if you like, around the human. So going beyond the humanist definition and conceptualization of the human as this being that is transparent to itself, that is in possession of their own language and rationality, and to think about, and this is what I mean by seeing the non-human as part of the human. So it's a way of kind of alienating the human, or recognizing the human for the alien that the human is, if you like. And the reason for doing this is not just some kind of philosophical or creative exercise, but I think that kind of defamiliarization of the human could then lead, I think, to developing both better philosophies of technology, including AI, and better sociopolitical frameworks. It's also, in another way, it's a way of cutting the human to size or shrinking some of the humanist fantasies about our own self-possession, mastery, and rationality. So that, in a way, ties in with your idea of identifying nonsense in the sense of the human, recognizing the glitchiness of human beings, the fact that there is always another logic, another kind of the system that unworks itself, that can't be perhaps fully controlled, not through some kind of God-given faculties, but because of the certain maybe embedded bug, if you like, within that system. And because both as a philosopher, as an artist, I'm interested in those bugs within the human system and how we can work with them. So they're non-human. The idea of that creativity as excess that Joe hinted at, for me, it's a way of trying to think about beyond the kind of instrumentality on optimization. Very often the language around the AI is the language of optimization. While we've got humans, but AI will be like a human, but will do this better and will do faster. And even around art, I mean, I've sat in a number of panels where people still applied a certain particular engineering mindset where you can do this and AI can also do it, but faster, quicker, or can deceive you because it will paint something and you will not know. And for me, that's not really the point of the cultural practice that we humans have defined as art. I mean, machines might do their own art. They might do all sorts of things we're completely unaware of and don't understand, have the capacity, the skills to do that. But for a particular human practice, through history and culture that, has particular meanings for us, that sense of creativity as this a kind of excess beyond instrumentality, doing something that is perhaps not needed, not necessary, and that also can go beyond that language of evolution as adaptation that I was talking about. So it's excess beyond both optimization of engineering and adaptation of biology. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Adrian.
Yes, actually, Dada was mentioned.
Yeah,
I'm actually I'm quite surprised in the way that I'm only in the field of AI since like a very short time, but there's a lot of things that relate to what I know for like 15 years with Dada. And of course, there's the great idea of nonsense. There's a very nice book by Ilias who wrote, like at one point, he kind of explains the joy of nonsense. So there's a lot of things in our world today and 100 years ago, 500 years ago, whatever, they don't really make any sense. So the only way of actually engaging into it is by just enjoying the total beauty of nonsense. So that's maybe a little bit of an anarchist and Dadaist idea. And also the term of like uselessness, like you hinted a little bit towards this, Joanna, was also a way of, back then they would talk that we are all kind of chained and shackled to an economic fatalism that gives us our character and our roles. And the only way was the idea of being totally useless and unproductive. And that's why you have a lot of ideas of nothingness. So Dada means nothing in the sense of a valid way of kind of resistance against this capitalist productivity would be to just do nothing. And it's quite surprising now in the pandemic, at least in privileged places like Switzerland, where you would see that just for 2 weeks, if we stop doing the things we do, then the economy almost collapses, So it's kind of surprising that this system is so fragile, actually, although it's so powerful. But I think the relation between randomness and imagination, I think it's quite a difficult task, so to say. I mean, the idea of randomness, of true randomness, is very difficult to understand. I think there's this relation to quantum physics and quantum indeterminacy where you have a true randomness because it's really unpredictable. But any other kind of randomness, like the artists used, like Hans Arp, for example, of course he would throw his forms, but then still arrange it a little bit. So there's still the subject in it, although they always had a very strong drive to get rid of the genius, creativity, the author, the artist, and so on. So for me, trying to imagine what true randomness is a great trigger of imagination in that sense. No? And maybe that's like a blind spot, like Yukui mentioned in his talk, where we have this Einbildungskraft, that is kind of trying to yearning towards this open field of true randomness. Yeah. So even in dialogue, there's a lot of randomness. It's like quite often we don't really understand what we're talking about. So it's more kind of alienating certain intuitions, tendencies, grabbing some words from a dialogue and associating to it. So yeah, it's a great time of randomness and the joy of nonsense.
long awaited, long overdue, I would say. Špela.
Yeah. So I guess I will add something that doesn't directly address randomness, but just to elaborate a little bit on where I'm coming from. So through the work that I've been doing, I've really been coming slowly to terms with the epistemologies and ontologies and ethics that are served to our societies through technoscience, right? So a lot of these questions that we're asking that end up defining our anthropocentrism come from a specific way of understanding the world. So in this sense, the way that I'm approaching the machinic is through, as a result of this particular worldview, this particular framework, right? So I would say that in that sense, when I introduce the vegetarian, I'm sort of putting us as humans on the same side as plants. And then the relation to the machinic, which is not technological, which is, again, a particular expression and ordering of the world, right? So in that way, I'm not addressing some absolute truths, but more like a historical comeuppance, right? This is how the relations are constructed. And in that sense, the vegetarian already for me serves as a sort of, like Joanna mentioned, as a defamiliarization with the role of the human, right? And this was also a question from the Q&A, and like, who is the protagonist of the plant in the plant machine? Is it people or plants? And I would say, well, the protagonist is this vegetarian that can be a person or it can be a plant in relation to these technologies of digitization, which follow particular rules, right? And so I love this phrase, non-common sense, because it's literally proposing, well, okay, maybe not in its dialectic, like the anti, right? So human, non-human, sense, non-common sense, or nonsense. Not that I mean, what I'm trying to say is it's not like one or the other, but the fact that this deep questioning of what is taken as common sense is, I think, a practice that is absolutely pertinent at this point in time, not questioning so much the technology, its creativity, its limits of being within the framework of technoscience, but rather imagining the relations otherwise. So how do you create a different common sense for this relation? And in that sense, you're also, while you're really asking yourself about the ontologies and the epistemologies of technoscience, you're also putting under question this status quo within which they exist, right? So you're opening up the possibility for a different type of their use, right? And if this might be by evoking a creativity or nonsense or absurdism, randomness, or whatever. But I think it's more like the aim of it's used with the aim of questioning the use, which is it's utilitarian, it's pragmatic, it follows a certain optimization, right? But the reasoning behind it is that which can be questioned. And this is, I will just to illustrate this actually share a really beautiful example that comes from agriculture, right? So on one hand, we are seeing these amazing high-tech applications where it's called precision agriculture, and big companies are developing it, like John Deere. They're having these amazing combine harvesters and sprayers that have sensors everywhere. They're autonomously driven vehicles with optimized ways of like traveling back and forth and do the spot treatment, right, of the fields. And on the other hand, you have efforts like permaculture or regenerative farming or agroecology, where everything is done manually, supposedly, because that's the way to do it. But the fact is, if we want to change the common sense from this kind of destructive monocultural plantation-scene orientation to this more permaculture, regenerative farming way of thinking, automation has to become a part of that as well, right? Because the labor intensity is just, it does, the calculation isn't there, because you need, let's say, 6 to 8 hours with heavy mechanization and 2,000 hours to work for a crop with just like moderate mechanization. The issue is, it's not that the technology wouldn't be useful for a sort of permacultural approach. It's just that the technology that is actually being developed is only within the logic of monoculture and extractivism, right? So a new common sense must be developed. It's not necessary, from my perspective, it's not only about a discussion of what advanced automation and AI brings to the table, but what is the common sense for its use? And that's sort of like where I find this kind of creativity, imagination, subversion, over-identification, all really valid and effective tools that just broaden the scope of possibilities. Sorry if I was a little bit too long.
No. This is very interesting, because you actually bring up a very nice. I mean, the idea of the autonomous, the physical autonomy, is okay. We're just living with it. I mean, things do have an ability to make decisions in the physical world, even like the driving car and everything. But what is more interesting to me, and that's where it gets even worse, is where the thing. I mean, the not the living thing, the things. They have their own philosophy. They start developing their own philosophy. They develop their own aesthetics, which is art that has been created on its own. They develop their own music, which is music developed on its own. And now they're developing a philosophy of themselves. In other words, the GPT-3, 4 is actually them telling us a philosophical argument about their philosophy. They're whispering to us something that we don't know. And it's not our philosophy about them. I'm not talking about the philosophy of us about things. I'm talking about the things telling us about themselves, who and what they believe in, which is a very different, strange concept. And I think that's the whole point of this conference here, is to pinpoint that this exists. I mean, Joanna brought it in with the GPT-4. She actually said the whole thing was, I interpreted, but the thing, the GPT-3 inspired me. Who is the GPT-3 and how does the GPT-3 inspire you? Who is it? Who are you talking to? And I'm not talking about the author. I'm talking about the actual thing, the idea that came to you. Who made that idea? That is what we're talking about. Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's obviously fascinating, considering the possibility of other forms of rationality, other forms of sensation developing in beings that are not human. And these beings could already be in existence. They could be obviously plants that we are now, the more we learn about plants, the more we are aware of forms of agency that they can exercise. Anthony Trewawis's work on plant behavior, I think, has been really game-changing. But we can also think about all sorts of hybrids and emergences. Myself, I would be probably wary of calling it that they have a philosophy and then they have all of this, because obviously, or art, because I'm acknowledging that these are the names that we humans have invented to describe some practices that historically make sense to us and organize our world. Maybe the cognitive and cultural spectrum, if we like, of those other alien beings will be completely different, and they'll have different ways of cutting between their practices to give them names and identify them as something. But in terms of, for example, working with GPT-2, and GPT-2 was quite clunky. There are better models now, GPT-3, and then the expanded version of it. So obviously, from an art point of view, it is interesting to see it as an experiment and a game, the kind of game that artists did before, as Adrian has given us lots of examples as well, from pre-AI, although not necessarily pre-technological times, including kind of Dada and other examples, where you bring in other forms of logic, other forms of sensibility, and you can do it through machines, you can do it through drugs, viruses, and all sorts of kind of collaborations, co-inhabitations. So this is what I was kind of looking at. And on the one hand, sometimes I think that humans are quite algorithmic as well in their pronouncements, in their discourses. And I don't subscribe to the theory that, we just run on software and that you can map the human brain easily into a machine. I don't actually believe in that, even though that assumption lies at the foundation of a lot of AI and machine vision. So I'm not there. But on the other hand, as a thought provocation, I'm thinking here with the philosopher Willem Flusser, I am interested in a certain algorithmicity, if you like, of human thought, of how often there is almost some kind of software running on us that surprises us. So when we speak, when we work, when we do things, also as a certain gesture of repetition that, it seems that code has been cloned. I use it as a metaphor, but it's a metaphor that helps me sometimes understand the weirdness of not just machines, but weirdness of humans. So that encounter was GPT for me, for the film, and to seeing what it does with the images, with the words, through all these different models, was precisely to open myself up more consciously. And so that is a gesture that I undertake as an artist, as a thinker, to experience that weirdness consciously through that kind of experience and seeing what transpires. I could have just thought of this. I wouldn't maybe needed to have got engaged in an experience, but the artifact itself is important because it gives me a certain, maybe not aesthetic pleasure, but certain aesthetic bemusement and a set of suspense of my own assumptions as well, and kind of knowing, not knowing. So it's also a way of playing, not just by myself, not being fully in control of my own act of play, but playing with another, what that another might be able to surprise me. And obviously, I don't actually truly believe that GPT-2 has its own intelligence. I think it's a misnomer, but it does something that, it maybe reveals something interesting about the glitchiness of human intelligence as well.
It's a dialogue. The human-machine dialogue that actually is the GPT. Is the interpretation that we do. But again, the question is, where does the idea come from? That's the thing. We can interpret as much as we want what comes out of the machine, but we don't know. We don't know where it came from. We cannot exclude it on the basis of our dominance as we made it. We didn't make it. We discovered.
I don't believe that our ideas come from ourselves either. Our ideas are always already carried through culture, through the environment, through the food that we eat. So I think the machine's idea probably came from, if it's an idea in the philosophical sense, but it always something that looks like an idea to the human. And maybe that's not a relevant question, but maybe our own ideas are also not ours.
Right.
I have some also comments because we talk about algorithm, but we should notice this term is created long before the computer because it's a Arabian term and it was invented 1,000 years ago. So it's also like reflect Joanna's concept that we should trace back to maybe longer history of the Asian wisdom, and we can find more. And I also find that it's interesting to, like, from Adrian's work, to combine AI with Babylonian vision or something. So I think we should not only combine the AI technology with some contemporary issues, but maybe trace back to more comprehensive things. So that's, I think, another thing we can do. Yeah. So
maybe to answer a little bit to this idea of things creating their own philosophy, in a way we could say things always create their own philosophy. So it's like at the moment we're talking a lot about artificial intelligence. A couple of years ago it was information, and then this kind of informs how we think about, I don't know, the cosmos or the universe based on consciousness, based on information. Other times, 250 years ago, it was mechanics. So in that sense, I think, things are creating philosophy constantly. And because we're here in this quantum physics or quantum imagination context, even I like to think about this time correlation between the discovery of this old quantum theory and the avant-garde artistic ideas, or relativity theory with Einstein being in the same town even back then. So I think there's always this kind of correlation and dialogue between science and things and art and creativity. So in that sense, yes, I would say, yes, things have their own philosophy, or maybe the things just trigger a philosophy for us. And what the Babylonian vision idea, which is this art project by Nora Al-Badri, is that it's basically a question about restitution and colonialism. So a lot of these Babylonian artifacts from the region of Mesopotamia, which is Iran and Iraq, are in Western European and US museums. So what she tried to do is to ask the museums if she could have the data to generate a techno-heritage, as she says. And of course, the museums refused. So having some good hacker connections, she managed to scrape the data and then create a kind of own techno-heritage, which is open for anybody, in that sense, maybe more accessible. And of course, you're also starting to then, if you're talking about big data and algorithms or AI, analyzing this big data, that's also a way of how we can influence the image of our world by creating new images which are not confined to these museums. So for her, using like tools like AI is always also a way of kind of empowering new knowledges and epistemologies. So yeah, that's a little bit this kind of, because it's very funny, all discussions today are very based on enlightenment. We even heard about Kant and Leibniz and the Germans and so on, Heidegger even. And somehow it's a very narrow pond. We're talking in a very narrow knowledge system. And my hope a little bit in working with AI is that we can, because it has this very big social and human civilization impact, and also the interest in the AI Center at the ETH is also to broaden this kind of knowledge system, to not just have a European perspective, an Enlightenment perspective, but also try and bring different knowledge systems into forming this AI, whatever it might be. But I think it's like a hope, which we always have with new technologies, though, that a lot of things will change. AI will solve our human problems. But maybe with this new drive that it has, that it's really kind of, affecting all systems in human society, it might be actually able to change our knowledge system more holistically in that sense.
Talking of Mesopotamia and the primitive thing, I think a lot of AI is in the primitive stage. The whole idea of animism, like you think that objects around you are alive. You ask for the future on the tree. The blowing of the leaves will tell me the future. Isn't that AI? That is the first type of AI that existed was exactly that. You believe that the water is telling you the future. You believe that the wind is something. It has a life. The light, I said the word earlier about light because the word what is it? Yuk was talking about the icon the icon, the word icon, and the word fantasy, and the word history, they all share the same word, which is the base of the word light, phao, which is the Greek word. And light is something that is very interesting because it's the way we see. It's something that affects us, and we understand. It becomes the beginning of intelligence because of the thing. A thing actually makes us intelligent. The thing makes us see. The thing makes us understand, enlighten us, right? But at the same time, the thing has its own logic. It works in its own way. It does its own things. And that's why it becomes the dialogue between us and the light, or the thing, the objects, the animism, things are actually the most important, in my opinion, form of AI. All this like new technology and GPT and, all this is okay, but it's very technological. And as a matter of fact, it's not even intelligent at the bottom of it. I mean, it's not really, it's more like common sense, really, what they're doing. I mean, if you go into the actual technical part, but if you go into the primitive mind, you find that the AI is much more like deep and much more philosophical in nature than it is today. Today is more technological. How can I use it to do things? How can I make this to my advantage? But in the past, it was more like a way of taking your soul out of yourself and lending it to the thing that you had in front of you, and take that thing and get back to you in a dialogue with nature, with the artificial. The artificial was much more approachable than it is today. Anyway, with that being said, and we're ready at 7:20. We're supposed to go out, and I don't know if there's any announcement. I think that I have to bring Sissy. I think Sissy is going to make some announcements for tomorrow.
Hello. Yeah, actually, this is Sissy. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's okay. Like when we left this conversation, I will leave a PowerPoint there so people know tomorrow when we are going to start our another session on 9 o'clock. It's okay.
Okay. So with that being said, and being in a lockdown that I am right now, and I think Sissy, me, the two of us are in a lockdown, the two different windows. We are like always talking together because we want to be more social in this kind of a enclosed environment. But again, it's the best source of inspiration too at the same time, because you are a monk. You're living alone and you're living with your own thoughts in your own environment. And that's actually a very, very good thing. Again, tomorrow I'm going to talk about this exactly, what the lockdown has actually done to our little minds, at least in my mind, what happened to me. So thank everybody. It was very good, very, very interesting. And I took all my notes here. I love all these arguments. And I would like to close this panel and, renew it for tomorrow. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, right, is the next session. Yeah.